Newcastle United travel to Nottingham Forest on Sunday for a really important Premier League game. But in this video I'm going to explain about the transfer strategy that Forest got right and Newcastle can learn from going forward. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another video on the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at a transfer recruitment angle on Newcastle United and Nottingham Forest, given that the pair of them play each other this weekend. But before we get into that, please do continue to like, share and subscribe to the videos in the channel. Be pleased with the growth over the last couple of weeks, particularly since my Hull City video. Lots of new subscribers, so welcome to you guys as well. But continuing to push it, I'll be adding to my Exploring Football series this weekend on Saturday. Also, could be, and hopefully, I'm just waiting for my accreditation, at the City Ground to watch Forest against Newcastle, where I'll be doing a video reaction from the City Ground. If I'm not at the City Ground, if my accreditation doesn't get accepted for whatever reason, there will be a live on Sunday, but hoping to be at the game, hoping to react from it right there. Nottingham Forest have been really impressive this season. They're third in the league. They got a point at Chelsea away. They beat Liverpool obviously at Anfield as well, and they are really playing well under Nuno Espirito Santo. And they kind of went under the radar, I think, at the start of the season. They're starting to pick up a bit of attention now. Really, it's a natural growth and evolution that Nuno's put in place, I think, since he's been there. Obviously, his second game in charge was at St James's Park when Newcastle lost 3-1 to Chris Wood, scoring a hat-trick from 1-0 up. It was a really lacklustre performance on Boxing Day last year. Newcastle fans were really unhappy with it, but actually lots of the foundations that have led to Forest's really strong start this season were on show in that game. They've turned Newcastle over in midfield. Morgan Gibbs-White ran riot, Elanga on one side, Hudson-Odoi on the other. The pace and the energy all behind the sort of physicality and the potent finish in that day and this season of Chris Wood's really worked. But where I want to focus on today is the centre-back, and particularly Nikola Milenkovic, and the signing of him from Fiorentina, the centre-back, £12 million, has been a revelation for Forest. It's given them a bedrock to build from. His relationship with Murillo, who's much more dynamic and pacey and quick, and a real sort of, they really complement each other. He's 6'5". He's not particularly quick, but he's really dominant, really good in possession and really dominant at winning the ball, both on the ground and in the air. Over 200 appearances for Fiorentina since 2017 when he joined from Partizan Belgrade. 60 Serbia caps, £12 million. And that is the crux of what Forest did right in the summer that Newcastle were consistently getting wrong when they were chasing Mark Gahey and bidding on the final day of the window for Anthony Elanga. Obviously, the transfer elephant in the room here, if you like, is Elliot Anderson and the PSR situation. What they did this summer, off the back of all the negativity with their own PSR issues and the points deductions last season and the craziness of what happened when they first came up in the scattergun approach, they've really streamlined themselves and become structured in terms of on the pitch and off the pitch as well. About to bring Edu in as an overarching director of football for Marinakis' empire, if you like, alongside Olympiacos and Rio Ave in Portugal as well. So they've got a structure in place that's really working for them, and Newcastle can learn a lot from that, but specifically from what they did with Milenkovic. Really experienced defender at 27 years old, and he was 26 at the time, I believe, as well. But £12 million, it just goes to show that quality is out there for cheap prices if Newcastle are willing to look for it. And what they did was what Newcastle had done for the first 18 months to 2 years of the takeover, where they were really good scouting in Europe. Not necessarily saying that Milenkovic should have been Newcastle's target and they should have gone and got him. I think he would have been a really good signing, but the sort of quick, dynamic centre-back that Newcastle needed. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are plenty of options out in Europe, and he was one of them. We're looking away from Premier League experience, where all of the value is not really there, as Newcastle found with Mark Gahey as well. So yeah, I think that is a really great sign that Forest made, that Newcastle and Paul Mitchell need to learn from going forward. If you're looking for Premier League players who are cheap and affordable and have good experience and are good enough, those players just don't exist unless they're in specific circumstances like contracts running out or something like that, because Premier League clubs are just rich enough to deal with that, and that's what Crystal Palace showed when they held on for that £70 million price tag over Mark Gahey's head, and it didn't budge because they knew they didn't have to, because they knew he had 2 years left in his contract, and keeping him for another year was probably worth the fact that they maybe would lose 30 million, maybe 20-30 million on his value for next summer. That's where Newcastle needed to be cleverer. And the annoying thing was they were cleverer before in the first part of the takeover last season, and this season it's really changed their approach, and they've really been more focused on domestic signings. That's why Harvey Barnes cost them £40 million, for example. Tino Livramento obviously £40 million as well. Lewis Hall, who has just made the England squad today, congratulations to him, he's been absolutely fantastic this season, was 28 million as well. So there's lots of really expensive players. That doesn't mean that they're not good players, doesn't mean that they can't have a really big impact, because all of those players have been really good for Newcastle when they've played. But it's about being clever, and Newcastle need to be more willing and able to scour the European markets, because there's lots of quality players. I mean, as I say, Milenkovic was a player that was very much on a lot of Champions League clubs' radars, has 200 appearances plus for Fiorentina, 60 Serbia caps. He was a ready-made player for a lot of big clubs, and it was a real coup for Forest to go and get him. Newcastle need to be that creative and that active in that way, and that's a real lesson, because Forest have begun to show what they're going to do. I'm not necessarily saying that they're in the Champions League race long term. They're going to carry on this for a long time yet to really create that sort of buzz around them, in my opinion, but they're certainly looking good for a top half finish, in very much the same way as Bournemouth, who similarly to they sold Dominic Solanke and went and bought Evan Nilsson, who scored a crucial goal for them against Manchester City from FC Porto, went and risked it on a player from abroad who they put their faith in and they believed could come through. And Newcastle have shown that the markets away from the Premier League, Sven Botman, Alexander Isak and Bruno Guimaraes, they've been three of Newcastle's best signings since the takeover. All came from abroad, and that's what I'm saying, is there's much more value and much better value options, and that's what Forest have shown. In Milenkovic, he's really, really good on the ball, really, really good in the air, and he complements Murillo perfectly. It's going to be a really tough game, I think, for Alexander Isak to deal with those two, because you've got the pace and the ability to match him on the ground from Murillo. You've got the height and the physicality and the ability to dominate the air of Milenkovic. You've got a real difficult job for Isak to get the better of those two, obviously with Gordon and hopefully Joe Linton as that front three, as it was against Arsenal at the City Ground on Sunday. But it's really just more of a thing about Newcastle need to look away from the Premier League for options. You can get defenders and right wingers who are much better and much more dynamic, much more interesting, untapped a little bit than you could in the Premier League, as seen with the Mark Gahey situation. Milenkovic really sums that up best, I think, because he's been absolutely phenomenal for Forest so far. He's given them that base to build from. Then you've got Gibbs White in behind, and Elliot Anderson as well in that sort of creative area. You've got Elanga and Hudson-Odoi, who've been really good out wide as well. They're going to give likely Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall a difficult game on Sunday as well. And then obviously you've got Chris Wood. It's easy now to say that Newcastle shouldn't have sold him, but he's never shown this sort of form. He really is in great shape, and it's going to be a very difficult game for Newcastle, as I say, on Sunday. But Nuno Espirito Santo, lots of people questioned the decision to sack Steve Cooper and bring him in, including a lot of Forest fans. But actually, from that moment of him playing at St James's Park, and that was a sort of blueprint for what they've done this season. They've been really good on the turn with those three players, and the focal point that Chris Wood's given them has been really good, but at the back they've been really, really solid, really effective, and it's because of that relationship between Milenkovic and Murillo, who are really, really good defenders in their own right, and together they've created this real bond. And that's come from two players who didn't have Premier League experience. They tapped into different markets. They didn't break the bank for either of them, and they've really been rewarded. Newcastle United need to be brave in the market. This is the evidence that they've got for that. Milenkovic is a really, really good defender. It's a real coup for them to get him. It isn't like they've found him from nowhere and he's just impressed. He was very well known to a lot of clubs, particularly in Italy. Inter had looked at him, I think, and various other clubs, and he was very, very highly rated. And as I say, for Forest to get him shows the quality and the money in the Premier League that Newcastle need to tap into if they're going to go and look for a right winger or a centre-back, because if they've got £70 million to spend, which they evidently had last summer, you can go and get, as I said so many times on videos across the summer in the Monday and Thursday shows, players at 30, 35 million who would instantly improve the first team, because that's what Sven Botman costs, that's what Bruno Guimaraes costs. Only outlier is Alexander Isak, because they've proven to themselves that you can find quality players for that money. But Forest have gone one further and found a really, really great centre-half in Nikola Milenkovic for £12 million. As I say, he wasn't an unknown quantity. 27 at his peak, 200 games in Serie A for Fiorentina, 60 caps for Serbia. This is not a hidden gem. This is a club that took a risk on a player that nobody else would, and they were really rewarded. And if Newcastle are clever and creative enough, they can find those deals as well, instead of getting bogged down and suffering badly from chasing Premier League proven players, as they have done in Gahey, as they did when they tried to buy Elanga for, they were quoted £50 million. There's absolutely no way that Anthony Elanga, as good as he is worth £50 million. If you were spending £50 million on the continent, you could get more bang for your buck. So thanks very much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe. As I say, I'll be back with another episode of Exploring Football on Saturday night, and hopefully from the City Ground on Sunday as well. Please subscribe to my Substack as well. There'll be a new column out every Monday in your inboxes from the Exploring Football series. Thanks so much for joining me. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.